Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the session on why global climate governance matters for business, the Paris Agreement and beyond. Apologies for this short delay. We're trying to work out all these logistics. So it's a pleasure to welcome you all here. We have a great session ahead of us. Just by way of introduction, I think that the key here that the global governance response so far is lacking. And we need a kind of exponential action across all sectors involving, of course, the private sector and business. So my perspective as someone who, by the way, I was very involved in the beginning of the Global Compact in the late 90s when Kofi Annan was started the Global Compact. I've been, through my foundation, partnering with the UN for many years on bringing in the progressive private sector. The last few years started a movement called the B Corps. The B Corps is B is for benefit. We have 15,000 certified B Corps and benefit corporations in 71 countries. These are companies that have taken it extremely seriously. Some are working for net zero by 2030 and beyond. You may know some of the names: Patagonia, Danone. In Europe, Triodos Bank, which has been active in sustainable finance for 40 years. So these are companies that are really, in a way, the vanguard. And I think they're very coincidental in a way that Europe, where I'm speaking from the Netherlands, has taken some real leadership in this area. We look at the EU and the Green Deal as very significant for Europe and beyond Europe. So we are really working to extend from Europe to the rest of the world, a more engaged private sector working for the goals that we all share here. By the way, the way the flow is, we will have presentations, a short video at the beginning, and I will try to gather questions. And so you're very welcome to either put them in the chat or I will come up after each session or speaker. I will invite one or two of you to come up with comments or questions. We want to make it very dynamic. So I am going to go straight to an opening video by Johan Rockström, director of the Potsdam Institute for Climate Input Research. And I will ask Jason, please, to put the video on. Thank you.
The super year 2020 by the COVID-19 crisis. Still, science is very clear. We need to bend the global curve of emissions and halt loss of biodiversity now in 2020. We've entered the decisive decade when global emissions need to be cut by half and continue to be cut by half every decade to reach a fossil fuel-free world economy by 2050 to have a reasonable chance of staying within a stable and manageable Earth system. Both the Paris Climate Agreement and the Sustainable Development Goals depend, therefore, on a full-fledged global sustainability transformation. It's no longer about the environment. A fossil fuel-free world and zero loss of nature is investing in reduced risks of pandemics, about security, about equity, about human well-being and economic development. It is about our future as humanity, the modern world of the future, on a stable planet. The global commons is therefore a new governance challenge for humanity. Actually, it's exactly the equivalent of COVID-19 when it comes to the biomes that regulate the state of the planet. Think of wet markets causing zoonotic spillover in one corner of the planet, propelling itself into a global crisis. It's exactly the same with the rainforests or the temperate forest or the ice sheets. One thing goes wrong there, tipping over from self-cooling to self-amplifying warming, and it sends invoices from the planet across the whole world, and it will be affecting all future generations in the world. Therefore, global governance for climate now needs planetary stewardship, where we all understand that we're living on this interconnected, self-regulating system where we need to govern the global commons, all the biophysical systems that regulates the state of the planet within planetary boundaries, scientifically based, safe operating space, which gives a high likelihood of keeping the planet in a manageable state. Now, today, the evidence behind this is very strong. In fact, tipping points today means something completely new. It's not only about catastrophic risks, which we have more and more evidence behind. In fact, just 2-3 months before the COVID-19 crisis, we had the latest update on tipping elements showing that 9 of the 15 known big commons or tipping element systems that regulates the state of the planet are showing signs of being on the move. They show signs of slowing down, of higher variability, of coming closer to tipping points. So we are today scientifically forced to consider the real risk of destabilizing the planet. But just let me share with you one new challenge when it comes to tipping points. The key is not the impact time, but the commitment time. When do we commit irreversibly all future generations on Earth to changed living conditions on planet Earth? Just take one example. Last time, according to paleoclimatic science, that we had 2 degrees Celsius warming, we actually had a planet that stabilized at 6 to 8 meters sea level rise. Of course, that took many hundreds of years, but today we're exactly in the same situation. The commitment time of potentially catastrophic outcomes for all future generations is in the next decades, like 20 to 30 years to reach 2 degrees Celsius warming. That would irreversibly push us on a trajectory that would take us to not 1 meter sea level rise, which is the projection for this century, but to several meters sea level rise over many centuries to come. This is the new challenge for us, to recognize that things will happen much, much earlier than we previously thought. We may be reaching 1.5 degrees Celsius warming very soon. In fact, just in the next 1 or 2 decades. Now, this requires the recognition that we may have now the force or the necessity to declare a state of planetary emergency. That now is the time to step up the momentum of transformative, accelerated change. We need more global governance, not less. And therefore, it was very encouraging to see that international cooperation is vital to deal with today's grand challenges. One of the key findings in the UN 75-year survey with 50,000 participants. What does this imply? Global governance of climate. Well, it implies adopting a global price on carbon to internalize the externalities to guide all investments in the future. It requires financial transfer systems that allows developing countries to now scale up and amplify the transition towards renewable, nature, sustainable solutions. It requires adopting science-based targets, not only for climate, but for all the planetary boundaries. It requires nature-based solutions with technologies and behavioral change that can allow us to move in the right direction. We have these solutions. It's interesting to see that nature-based solutions can actually contribute with up to 30% of the requirements of decarbonizing towards the Paris Agreement, while at the same time keeping ecosystem functions and ecosystem services that delivers on our food systems intact. We need new alliances because we must recognize that while we need global governance more than ever, we are, if possible, at an all-time low in terms of trust in cooperation between countries in the world. So we need alliances for transformative change, fast-track and scalable sustainable solutions, exponential roadmaps, adopting technologies, adopting new system behavior among businesses, cities, and governments that are willing to show the pathway forward. Why is this so important? Well, because we have more and more empirical evidence that sustainability is no longer the story of sacrifice. It's no longer about stepping back from good human development. It is the pathway to success. It's the pathway to prosperity. It's the pathway to an equitable future. Therefore, I would strongly argue that global climate governance is not only necessary for business and policy to succeed in delivering the Paris Agreement, it's also a pathway for the future we want. And therefore, getting that spillover in terms of positive social tipping points to show that this is possible is the avenue, is one of the key avenues forward. So therefore, this dialogue is so important to start amplifying and start working together in alliances of positive change. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Well, we thank you, Johan, from a distance. I'm making one quick comment. Everyone is online. In my world of the B Corps and the more progressive companies, we have an initiative called Cities Can Be. It's citiescanbe.org on the internet, with already 6 cities around the world partnering with corporations for various climate and sustainability objectives. And this is exactly one of the areas that Johan was mentioning, creating these new alliances that cut across the sectors, cut across the actors, working together for a common goal. So citiescanbe.org for you. I'm going to bring in Magnus and Maya to give us their introduction to the session. Magnus and Maya, please.
Oh, Magnus, I think we're having a sound issue again.
Well, Maya, maybe you can start now,
Sure,
and then we can
should
bring Magnus.
Should I leap in? Okay, thanks. Thanks, welcome everybody. Thank you so much, Marcello. And firstly, a very warm thank you to Ambassador Amanda Ellis, the Director of Global Partnerships at ASU Wrigley Global Futures Laboratory, for the invitation to be here. Thanks to her very much. So as Magnus will also share, there is a new climate governance commission, which Professor Johan Rockström is involved with. Others who are involved in this commission are on this call and will share some perspectives. And the commission is convened by the Swedish Global Challenges Foundation. And I would just encourage you all to check out their website. And the commission's objective is really, as Professor Rockström was saying, to fill a very crucial global governance gap in confronting this unprecedented climate challenge, to propose feasible, high-impact global governance solutions for exponential climate action to limit global temperature rise to Paris Agreement's targets, and in accordance with Sustainable Development Goal 13. So really, as Johan Rockström was saying, to try to take this new global governance challenge by the horns, we have to think about regulating properly according to scientific dictates, this new global governance system, which we have to solve in our best interests. So collectively, we have to be honest that to date, the global governance response has not been sufficient to confront the gravity and the urgency of the problem. For example, Climate Tracker has reported that based on national policy action so far, we have a 97% chance of overshooting the upper 2-degree centigrade limit of the Paris Agreement, putting us in a very serious climate danger zone with very difficult and uncertain consequences, as you heard from Professor Rockström. So the question is now, how do we collectively support and implement the Paris Agreement in an exponential manner, and also, as necessary, supplement it with other global governance mechanisms, other very strong alliances for really unprecedented global action? So as a background in the global corporate space, we all know that ESG, environmental, social, and corporate governance, is becoming increasingly adopted as a paradigm. However, that perspective on governance is mostly from an individual, corporate, or firm perspective. And we would argue in the commission that perspectives should be enlarged to include the crucial dimension of global governance. And the business community should be aware that the current global architecture is very weak across a range of risk areas that threaten future stability. So we already see some examples of a new global governance paradigm shifting to engage business, progressive businesses, as Marcello was noting, for example, his pioneering work and those of many others in the Global Compact itself, representing a sea change in the way global governance is done, not just focusing on states. With the SDGs and Agenda 2030, of course, was another paradigm shift, addressing all stakeholders to achieve shared international goals and values. So these are all extremely positive trends that we're building on. However, these need to be amplified much further due to the speed and scale of the economic transformation required. You all likely recall the October 2008 special report by the IPCC urging rapid action to transform the global economy at a speed and scale that has, quote, no documented historic precedent. So for this to actually happen, to have emissions each decade, as Johan Rockström was explaining, we need all actors engaged and cooperating in really unprecedented ways. So we would argue that the business communities have to be much more proactively involved in strengthening sound global governance. For example, we know that in the context of the Paris Agreement, business leaders of the B team at COP21 were very influential in sending strong signals to governments that they saw ambitious action as very beneficial. So these sorts of trends should be replicated across multiple countries, regions, and also at the international level going forward to ensure that we have adequate global governance tools to solve our collective ecological problems, which really threaten the very foundations of our current and future shared prosperity. So in the interest of time, I'll stop there and hopefully Magnus can intervene.
Can we hear you, Magnus? Thank you. But you're quiet, you're silent. We don't hear him.
Perhaps try leaving and joining again, Magnus, as you did last time, to see if that solves.
Let's see that. Maya, thank you very much. We wait for Magnus to come back. I see he's returning. Can we hear you now, Magnus?
Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Perfect.
Okay. Good. Thank you very much. So my name is Magnus Ibon, and I'm head of research at the Global Challenges Foundation, which is a foundation that is working to promote development of global governance models that would help us more effectively handle the different catastrophic risks that humanity is facing, whereof, of course, climate change is one of the most prominent ones, but also pandemics, as we have experienced.
I think he's left again, no? We can't hear him. Magnus, we cannot hear you, sorry. It's a hassle, but maybe you can try and do that again, log off and come back. I'm sorry.
So now?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's hope I will manage to go through. We are focusing on global catastrophic risks and the global governance structures that we need in order to be able to tackle those global catastrophic risks that we are facing more effectively. For example, climate change is obviously one of them, but there are also other large-scale environmental crises that we are facing, loss of biodiversity and so on, but also pandemics, weapons of mass destruction, and other types of catastrophic risks that we are facing. The foundation was established 8 years ago by Laszlo Szombatfalvy, who is a successful financial analyst and investor on the stock market, who was specializing on risk analysis related to the stock market. But when he retired, he is continued to think and write about risk, but other types of risk, namely the big risk that we face together. And his impression was that no business leader would ever handle risks in the way that we do in the international community, with the very big risks that we are facing. And he asked himself, why is this so? And as a simple analysis was that is because we lack the mechanisms to take rational decisions about the great risks that we face together. So he donated his fortune to work on these issues. How can we improve the way that we handle great risks together? And the Climate Governance Commission that Maya has been talking about is one of the issues that we are now working very much on. And the idea of the Climate Governance Commission, as Maya told you, is to to convene a number of leading policy experts from around the world to try to identify some high leverage innovations of the global governance structure that would facilitate the implementation of known solutions that we have to the climate emergency.
It's gone again. Magnus, sorry to interrupt you. You have to start again. You're leaving us. I don't know why this is happening, but I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Am I back? I don't know what is happening here. Anyway, there are a couple of reasons to focus on climate change in order to improve global governance in general. And one is, of course, the urgency of this issue. If we don't manage to pull ourselves together and handle the climate emergency, there will be few other problems for the international community to handle in the future. Another reason is the sense of emergency that we have around this issue, that there is now a sense of emergency means that there is an openness and a support for the transitional changes that as Johan Rockström told us, are needed in order to handle this challenge. And there is also a growing mobilization, both among grassroots, but also, as we see here, among businesses that want to be part of the solution, that want to spearhead the transition rather than so there is a momentum and a sense of emergency, but also the complexity of the climate issue, which is such that you cannot tackle climate change in a separate policy box. It has bearing on all other policy areas: finances, international trade policy, industrial policy, energy policy, development policy, peace and security and violent conflict, equality, biodiversity. So, and what that leads to, the conclusion of that is that if we manage to handle this problem in a rational way, then we will actually create a structure that will allow us to be much better suited to tackle the crisis that we will confront in the future. So this Climate Governance Commission does not try to duplicate work that is being done in other initiatives. We do not engage in the climate science as such. We try to build on the best climate science available. We do not try to come up with new technological solutions or new business solutions. There are existing working business models, and there are working technological solutions available. So the question is, why are we not? We know the gravity of the problem, so why are we not doing what we know should be done? And that is the question for this Climate Governance Commission. What are the bottlenecks and barriers that prevent us from doing what we...
Now he has disappeared again. Magnus, sorry, please come back again. I am just going to animate this a little bit. Thank you. We had a couple of comments from Chuck Watts, who is talking about some very conservative business leaders, and that reminds me...
I'm very sorry about this. Do you hear me?
You can hear you. Please.
You hear me?
Would you like to finish?
So I'm very sorry about this. So I should be very short, brief then. So what we ask is, how can reforms of global governance structures, that means international institutions, regulations, legal institutions, modes of decision making and so on, how could those facilitate the solutions that already exist? For example, exemplified by the solutions that have been identified by Exponential Climate Action Roadmap Initiative, which Johan will tell you more about, and also the business solutions that are already known in the businesses that Linda will tell you more about how we work in incorporating that in our work. So thank you for listening, and I'm very sorry for the technological problems that we experienced here. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Magnus. Wonderful. I was going to say that there are some comments on the chat here from Chuck Watts talking about the conservative business leaders, and I know that there have been various lists made by World Resources Institute and others, that there's something like 96 major companies in the world are the main polluters. So I think what I see from my perspective is that there is a progressive end of companies that are really moving the agenda forward and doing things like working with cities, working with NGOs, with philanthropists, but also there are groupings of conservative business leaders. And one of the discussion that we've been having in preparing for this is, in a way, the number one thing to do is to stop doing what is actually creating the climate problems. And here we go straight into energy, into oil, fossil fuel, but also major industries like concrete production and, of course, mobility, transportation. So we need to be detailed and quite scientific about where are these bottlenecks, as I think Magnus was referring to. We will pick it up in a moment. Maya, do you have anything else to add? Otherwise, I'm going to go to Bruno Sarda and invite you to make your contribution, Bruno. Please.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah. Okay.
I was going to try to share a few slides today, but given the stability of the platform, I think I'm going to try without. I'll make a few comments, and I'll obviously in advance, given that this is Climate Week, we're all kind of booked back to back, and I'm hosting a session on sustainable agriculture and food systems in a little while, so I'll need to drop off before the Q&A section. But just to share a few things about CDP, or formerly known as the Carbon Disclosure Project, and our role in global climate governance. We're 20 years old this year. We were founded 20 years ago with basically this basic idea that as frankly, governments were moving too slow, it was important to try to inject the system with more information, more insights, and frankly, more accountability to help push decision-making, but also action along. So, we pioneered environmental disclosure 20 years ago. We are the global disclosure platform for business and cities. Started small, but, now we have nearly 10,000 companies, over 1,000 cities, companies representing about 60% of global market capitalization, cities representing over 1 billion people. Again, injecting information into decision-making systems across the 4 key stakeholders where we work around business, cities, capital markets, and policymakers. And we do that, again, by basically creating a disclosure platform and questionnaires that are, developed through consultative process to then fuel, the deepest level of data on corporate action and corporate behavior on climate change anywhere. We do this then followed by fueling and pumping all this information into the entire, what we call the ESG data ecosystem. So all of the, if you will, academics, policymakers, capital market actors, and other nonprofits that weigh in on the role of business in advancing climate action or climate solutions usually use CDP data as kind of their core, because again, nobody else collects the information we collect. I liked Ban Ki-moon a few years ago, commented around the time of COP21 that CDP, our work was crucial to the advancement of global climate action. But I really liked what Christiana Figueres had to say, where she said, CDP is to the future of business what the X-ray machine was then to the future of medicine, which is, until you can see inside the patient, you don't exactly know what you're doing. So that's really what we're doing, is we're providing a look inside the patient, if you will, although in some cases where the business is the patient, in some cases it's the cause of the patient's ill health. But just to give you a sense of some of the things we do specifically. So obviously collecting information is at the core, but we're also the founding member of the Science-Based Targets Initiative, which you've heard about today. Back around the time of COP21, there was barely around 100 companies that had set or committed to set a science-based target. Around the time of the Global Climate Action Summit a little while back, we were barely at 450. We might hit 1,000 this week. About 990 large organizations have set or committed to set science-based targets, whose collective emissions represent roughly that of Western Europe. So these are not small emitters, if you will, and again, on a trajectory to hit decarbonization in line with what climate science tells us. We also produce a lot of insights. We've been fueling a lot of climate insights to financial regulators like the Financial Stability Board, the FSB, the NGFS, group of central banks around the world, and other groups to really inform, again, a lot of the calculations around financial risk and systemic risk, both portfolio risk, credit risk, but also just risk to the entire system based on just a couple hundred large companies last year were identifying over $1 trillion of near-term risk, this is 3 to 5 years, in their business models associated with the lack of climate action. So all of this we do to try to inform, again, governance and to act to some extent in a governance vacuum as long as there's not stronger regulatory mechanisms. A couple more things I'll say. One is, we did some seminal work on carbon pricing going back to 2013 and identified, how over 1,100 large companies were already using some form of internal carbon price and made that information available. That's really been instrumental in actually fueling the conversation around both why to set a price on carbon and how to set a price on carbon. Or again, more tactically, working at the intersection of finance and cities to help finance climate infrastructure and climate resilience projects. So, to conclude, I say, at CDP, we've lived 100% of our time in the last 20 years above compliance, if you will. We're kind of the tip of the spear and trying to move regulatory and governance decisions in the right direction, helping to pave the way for ambitious policy and decisions, both from business and finance. But we do so, helping pave that way, but not waiting for it, because frankly, we don't have time for that. So thanks again for having me today.
Well, Bruno, thank you very much. I'd like to pick up something that Amanda Ellis has mentioned in the chat about many trillions of assets that CDP doesn't have, but you have investors that are working with you that control. What is the state of the conversation with investors, Bruno? Yeah,
that's a great point. Actually, that number is about $115 trillion now. There's very few large asset managers and asset owners who do not request, basically, who are signatories. These, we act on their behalf. We request information from business and on behalf of investors. And in the past, it was really to inform what we used to call, early days SRI, investing, and then later ESG products. So their climate fund, their carbon-free fund, those kinds of things. But now the conversation is all about risk and opportunity. It's all about de-risking portfolios, and it's all about what investors like to call creating alpha. So looking for opportunity in the data. Amanda mentioned in an earlier session that for the last 7 straight years that we've analyzed, CDP A-list companies, so that rank top in our scoring mechanism, have outperformed the global market by an average of 5.5% per annum. That's pretty significant outperformance of financial markets that we're actually already doing pretty well. Really trying to create this systemic link between financial information and environmental information.
Wonderful. Bruno, thank you very much, and good luck with your next session. Okay, so I'm going to bring in Linda Johan. Linda, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's Johan Falk here. I'm heading up the Exponential Roadmap Initiative, and I will try to share 1 or 2 slides. Can you see the slides?
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Great. So as Johan Rockström mentioned, we introduced something called the Roadmap for Rapid Decarbonization in 2017. So that basically highlights something called the carbon law. In order to avoid dangerous or minimize, decrease the risk for dangerous climate change, we need to cut emissions by 50% every decade. It's a very simple rule of thumb. And this obviously has to happen in parallel in all segments, in all sectors. And we also have to scale the carbon sinks in parallel, a tremendous challenge. And that was a background for something called the Exponential Climate Action Roadmap, which was presented first in the Global Climate Action Summit 2018 by Johan and Christiana. And it basically highlights the key solutions in order to halve emissions by 2030, everything from energy, like wind, solar, of course, industry, buildings, transport, food, and also nature-based solutions. And one of the key conclusions from this work, which has been done by industry scientists and NGOs and experts in terms of exponential technologies, is basically that the solutions for the first halving, they do exist, but they need to be scaled exponentially. We can't have a linear scaling. That is very important. A key point is that our laser focus in society should be now the first halving up to 2030. It's obviously very important to have a target on net zero around 2050 or before 2050, but the key point is the first halving. And that is also the narrative that we are pushing very much, and I think we influenced both the Race to Zero and TED Countdown as two examples. Now, for these solutions to scale, that won't happen automatically, that's obvious. It requires very strong policy, it requires a shift focus from finance, it requires that we apply digitalization, exponential technologies to actually accelerate 1.5 aligned solutions, not the opposite. And finally, it requires very strong climate leadership, from cities, from individuals, and not at least from companies. And that's the reason why we next started to work as a spin-off to look at how can we accelerate exponential action from businesses. And one spin-off with something called the Business Playbook, which basically describes what companies need to do in order to align with the 1.5 ambition. So we quickly have been growing that ecosystem to around 55 organizations, as you can see on the left, everything from IKEA to Unilever, etc., who commits basically to not only cutting emissions by half by 2030 towards 2050, but also to integrate climate action in their strategy and contribute to societal action. Now, as a spin-off of that, we, together with ICC, the Chambers of Commerce, and We Mean Business and UNFCCC, just released today something called the SME Climate Hub, which is basically a meeting place for smaller companies in order to commit and drive climate action. In order to do that, it's not just about committing to the targets, but the idea is, of course, to bring resources and bring incentives and bring tools to the companies, basically enable cutting emissions, and link to that to bring on board the big companies, as you can see, something called the supply chain leaders, to support the smaller companies to actually cut emissions really quickly. So these are some examples. We believe very much in a race to the top in the business community and driving the fear of missing out. So I stop there. The key point is we need to get a critical mass of actors focusing on cutting emissions by 2030 next.
Well, thank you very much, Johan. Wonderful. And I have a question, but I will leave it for later. I would like to hear Linda. Linda, please.
Thank you. Yes, as we heard, the business community has an play where clusters of progressive companies today actually often lead the way. And that many companies see that there is a competitive advantage to speed up the transition to fossil-free business models in order to be able to grow in the future. And it is crucial that proposed global governance solutions are linked to real problems and obstacles that progressive business leaders actually encounter in trying to change their business models to become carbon-free. And therefore, it's very important that these progressive companies take part in the discussion on global governance solution, and also to strengthen the green lobbying. In the Climate Governance Commission, I have conducted several interviews with leading companies from the heavy industry, transport sector, retail, as well as financial investors. And those interviews have so far highlighted the idea of climate clubs, like clusters of companies. It could also, of course, be countries. EU could be seen as a climate club, cities, etc., as a pragmatic way to move forward and to increase competitiveness. And also I believe that climate clubs can be important to reach like a learning curve and economies of scale, as well as needed technical development. One interesting example is the early growth of renewables in Germany that gave the rest of the world, I would say, access to low-cost renewables. And in parallel, those climate clubs or clusters of progressive businesses strengthen the politicians' mandate to agree on needed legislation and policies. And in that sense, climate clubs is a way to exponentially also scale governance solutions. So I would like to share just a few takeaways regarding obstacles and governance solutions that the business leaders that I have been interviewed has pointed out. And one great or big obstacle is the lack of clear long-term visibility and lack of a global price of carbon, as well as fossil subsidies. And since we are far away from a global price on carbon, one important step can be like regional prices on carbon, complemented with carbon border adjustment mechanism, as for example the EU is planning for now. Another solution should be to remove, of course, subsidies to fossil fuels, but also to set like a stop date on the usage of fossil fuels that gives industries long-term visibility, as well as time for adjusting their businesses. Another obstacle is, of course, financial obstacles, lack of accounting standards for CO2 emissions and climate risks, similar to financial accounting standards. How can companies and financial actors value climate risks in a similar way to how they value or estimate financial risk? Conditions of investment is also one obstacle, both financing, of course, for long-term research and knowledge development, but also financing the next important steps where projects often fail, like finance through technologies, pilot plants, and so on. And how to bring new technologies to market, and also, of course, financing conditions for countries that are seen by the private equity sector as high-risk countries. Another obstacle that is important to address is that we have the linear instead of circular economy, where governance solutions should address both, of course, material and product lifetime, but also that we really need new guidelines on what is not waste and that instead can be used as resources. So that is just a few examples, and I would say that it is a very positive trend that so many companies now are taking the lead in preparing for a fossil-free future while strengthening their competitiveness. And it is very important to link this work to a demand for governance solutions from the business community. So if you're interested in sharing your thoughts on obstacles as well as global governance solutions to address climate risks, you are more than welcome to contact me. Thank you.
Fantastic, Linda. Thank you very much. I'd like to open up, but I wanted to ask you something, Johan and Linda. Given that both of you are in Sweden, can you enlighten us a little bit of what is maybe happening in Sweden that is of interest to other countries in terms of this agenda, businesses working in governance for climate?
I can just start with a short, I think that it can be inspiring to study the Fossil Free Sweden initiative. For several business or industries in Sweden have made up their own, it's like a bottom-up approach where they have made up their own roadmaps in how to become fossil free to 2045, and you can find them in English as well. So Fossil Free Sweden is one example. Johan, would you like to add some?
No, I think that's a great example, I would say.
Yeah, I think it's I have worked in Sweden and Denmark. I think that some of the Nordic countries have been quite ahead. Denmark, of course, has been promoting the wind energy for 2 or 3 decades and make their industry leading in the world. So I think something that Magnus was saying earlier, these clusters in certain sectors can actually become vanguards all around the world globally. And, the Chinese ended up buying Danish technology, et cetera, So there's a real competitive advantage from developing solutions that are ahead of other countries, because often people wait until the last minute, but actually very often the first mover advantage can be very valuable for companies and for changing the system.
Marcello, could I just make one more comment about the Swedish dimension, because the last I heard, Sweden is one of the very few countries in the world that has a price on carbon that's high enough to actually drive real movement towards the Paris Agreement climate goals. So, I mean, working in Sweden versus other countries, there's a palpable feeling of initiative and innovation and also positivity about really driving innovation and successfully meeting targets. It's quite rare, so it is quite an extraordinary example of governments take more aggressive action to help support business innovate and go forward with next generation solutions.
Yeah, wonderful. I think that there's a question from Daniel Truran to Maya. Could you share what is happening in the Netherlands? Do you have something about the Netherlands? I add one thing, which I don't know everyone on the call may know. So the Netherlands, through an amazing organization called Urgenda, was the first country in the world where civil society took the government to court for not doing enough for climate. And they won 3 times. And now they put a lot of pressure on the Dutch government to do much more, which we are living it through now as we speak. The government is accelerating its response. So the power of civil society, business working together cannot be underestimated. We have 6 minutes left. So in the interest of being on time, I want to open up to some questions. First of all, does anyone on the panel here have questions to each other? I think Johan, I don't know if Johan is still there, but maybe if there are, please prepare questions. Otherwise, do prepare questions. And I'm looking here at the chats. So Amanda Ellis is saying, a little bit tongue-in-cheek, great role models in the Nordics, but Norway, no oil economy is not. So this is actually a very interesting point, because what about all these countries that are oil-producing countries? What is how are they playing this in this transformation? Does anyone know? Would anyone like to say something? Without pointing fingers, because we have the US is an oil-producing country, of course, and Saudi Arabia, but also Norway, as we see. So we're all in the same boat. Who has something to say, to share? I mean, I want to just say one thing about what Bruno said earlier. It was very, very important that the asset value of some of these oil companies has been collapsing. As you know, Shell and BP have written down their asset values by, I don't know, 19 billion, 20 billion or so in the last few months. So even if you are an oil producing nation, you better look for what the future is bringing, and you don't want to invest your future revenue into oil. You better put it into alternatives, which I think is what Norway, I think, has been trying to do. So Norway, I've used the oil, but hopefully they are putting a lot of this money into the next sources of energy, of fuel. Magnus, I'm sorry, but your microphone is letting you down today. Sorry. Okay, maybe you want to switch off and on again. Linda?
Yeah, just a short comment. That of course we will see also the coming years the strong forces of the fossil lobbying trying to slow down this transition, and therefore it's so important that all those progressive companies that also want to strengthen their competitiveness in the future also take part in the green lobbying force. And I just saw that there was a question here too from Reen Tantat regarding the developing countries and so on. And I believe that there is another dimension to this, because the fossil industry is also so centralized often, and like renewable energy is much and also now when we can see low costs for both solar and wind and so on, that is, I would say, a really great chance for the transition also to be a bit more decentralized and democratic. But still, we have those financial obstacles that need to be addressed, and maybe like aid, state aid and so on should also take into account to maybe be more business-like, like being able to take the first loss, for example, in renewable investments in developing countries and so on. So there is a lot of work to do.
So thank you very much, Linda. I have one, and I'm looking at the chat here, but one connecting thought, and that is, we see and we hear in Europe for some time now, some of these more progressive companies, like I know a good friend of mine, Feike Sijbesma from DSM, who may be on the call. He's been very active in the Global Compact. He's been saying it for years, we need to have carbon pricing. And so the connection I'm making is, does anyone know of any, say, a city that has developed its own carbon pricing? Like if you want to supply or work in the city, you pay a carbon tax. Like, you know, in the US, cities have local taxes that are quite different from each other. So could we have a local carbon tax? Does anyone know? Does Stockholm have a carbon tax?
Sweden have a carbon tax.
Okay.
But I would say that I believe that since we are far away from a global price on carbon, it's really important now to, and many of those business leaders that I've interviewed also are very, very positive to the EU work of carbon border adjustments, because they they strengthen the businesses also competitiveness, since the rules will be the same for all businesses. So I believe it's important to try to promote those like regional carbon prices, and then hopefully we'll have a global carbon price as well.
Okay, so now we are getting to the end. I was, well, some of you may know, Daniel and others know, there is a very progressive Minister for the Environment in New Zealand, James Shaw. James sent me a note yesterday that New Zealand is actually been the first country in the last few days to make carbon disclosure mandatory for all businesses and all economic entities. So this is what I'm really saying is that you don't have to wait for the whole world to move. You can start moving in your own locality, in your own business. So you have to do both. We have to move globally, but we also have to move where we are, in our cities, in our regions, in our companies. So it's at different levels we have to move towards this change. I'm looking at Maya and Magnus as the host of the session. Whether you have any final words to say, it's now 5 o'clock, or at least my time, 5 o'clock, I think 11 o'clock in the US. Please, Maya.
Yeah, just one last comment about this brilliant movement in New Zealand or some of the excellent governance that's been happening in Sweden, that we really hope with this Climate Governance Commission, we can think about, yes, how can we, scale up what these first movers in various nations are doing around the world. The EU is very admirable what it's doing progressively now, but how do we create bigger climate clubs of nations that really have ambition, maybe need support, need policy support. So we're going to be looking at this. What happens in New Zealand shouldn't stay in New Zealand. That should be generalized. They're an outlier which should be followed around the world as with other national level innovations. So we have to scale that up too and make that exponential, the great policy that's happening at the national level.
Fantastic. So, dear hosts, speakers, and participants, a pleasure to have had you. I hope you found it valuable, useful. There are lots of things in the chat, and I will say goodbye. Thank you.
Marcello, thank you everybody for joining us.
Thank you. Pleasure. Thank you.